All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to New York State Department of Veteran Services Chat and Chew virtual information session. I am everybody's favorite moderator, Dr. Lessie Branch, and we are joined um, today by Dr. Chelsea Reichert and by Reverend Denise Lawson, who will be talking to you about services that their individual agencies offer. This is in celebration of Veterans Month, so thank you and happy Veterans Month to all who have served. The title of our webinar for today is Mind Matters, Veterans Brain um, Veterans in Brain Health, exploring the Nathan S. Kline Institute, and Tap In. The purpose and goals for our time together today are to introduce who Nathan Kline Institute and Tap In are, what their missions, their locations, and their leadership in psychiatric, mental health, and brain research, to clarify what each of these agencies do, and to explain why, importantly, it matters to veterans to participate and learn what it is that these two agencies have to offer, and to finally encourage veterans, those who have served, to attend future in person or virtual sessions offered by NKI and TAPIN. Offering welcome remarks on behalf of our Commissioner, Reverend Viviana DeCohen, who is out and about in community across the great state of New York as we celebrate Veterans Month. And so I extend her best wishes and greetings to each of you who are attending today on her behalf. And with that, I'm going to toss to um, Dr. Chelsea Reichert to tell us who she is, what she does, and why it's important. And then we're going to hear from Reverend Denise Lawson. So take it away, Dr. Reichert.
Thank you, Leslie. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Veterans Month, everyone. Thank you so much to all who have served. So my name is Dr. Chelsea Reichert. I am a research scientist from the Nathan Kline Institute. I am a member of the Geriatric Psychiatry Division. Leslie, did you want me to talk about the Nathan Kline Institute at this time?
Well, you can just sort of give a high overview, and then we'll hear from Reverend Lawson.
Sure. So the Nathan Kline Institute is a New York State research facility that's been independently operating since the early 80s. The Nathan Kline Institute, one of the overarching goals is to improve the lives of individuals who are suffering from different psychiatric conditions. Nathan Kline, or NKI as we call it, is under the direction of Dr. Donald Goff, who is a psychiatrist who studies one of these types of psychiatric disorders called schizophrenia. And he is he's the fourth director who's actually been running Nathan Kline for at least 10 years now, a little more than 10 years. And there's actually 6 major research programs going on that look at anything from studying animals all the way up to clinical research, studying humans, which is what the research lab that I am a part of does. There's actually, I counted 37 different research labs, each studying different topics associated with psychiatric conditions. So as I mentioned, I'm from the Geriatric Psychiatry Division, and we actually study both normal and pathological aging. We study biological variables related to this. We also study this through behavior, and we are interested in different what we call risk factors that increase an individual's chance of developing something like dementia, or very often we hear the term Alzheimer's disease, which I know we'll be getting into more detail with. So some of these factors could be specific to veterans. It could be specific to older individuals. And like I said, we'll get into all this. So I'm very excited to be here. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. Let's hear now from Reverend Lawson.
Hi, good afternoon to everyone. And my name is Reverend Denise Lawson. I am the president and CEO of POP Services. And under POP Services, I have the Tap In Dementia Toolkit. And what the toolkit is a program that actually educates and supports people with dementia and and their caregivers. It's a very person-centered, reflective program, and it deals with dementia, learning about dementia. I'm a member of the Alzheimer's Association, so they've been really wonderful as far as giving training as far as Alzheimer's. But what I find in my research and studies is that it's very difficult for people, especially caregivers, when they're in the midst of a dementia patient, to learn. So what we try to do is get everybody together and be kind of proactive so that when these things happen, you're already in touch with people that can help you, with a support team, with people that care about you and are walking your journey or have walked your journey. So that makes it a lot easier to get through what you're getting. So that's in a nutshell what we do. And as we go further into, I'll talk about more.
That's amazing. So thank you all for giving a high level overview of what it is that your agencies and you personally do, why it is so impactful and so important to hear from the both of you today. And I really, really appreciate it. You know, a lot of times, unfortunately, we tend to be reactive instead of proactive. And then when we're reactive, we are not thinking from the most clear mindset, and things, you know, sort of compound, and that's never really a good frame of mind to make decisions in. So the next thing I want to talk about is what research um, uh, do you engage in, and why? What what research matters to veterans? With the example of cognition, aging, Alzheimer's, PTSD, trauma, brain injury, and the like. So I'm going to switch the order this time. I'm going to begin with you, Reverend Lawson, and then we're going to hear from Dr. Reichert.
Oh, sure. The reason why tap-in particular is so important, and especially to veterans, is that I see that with veterans that I know, they are into community. Community is very important to them. When you're in a caregiving space, you need a community around you. But not only a community around you, a community that understands what you're going through, can give you support, and can really help you through that journey. What happens is that so many people, they're just in it by themselves. And it's difficult. It's very, very difficult to journey anything, especially with chronic illness, by yourself. It becomes just impactful, overwhelming, and just sometimes a horrible experience. And what I found with a lot of my participants is that the Veterans Administration for the state of New York has really helped them so much because they had access to tools that people did not know about. And that is so critical, because when you're overwhelmed, you're looking for someone that can help you, anybody that can help you, and you just don't know where to go. You know, so we've had Benjamin Pomerantz come and speak. We've had Jonathan Fishbein share his story. Reverend Viviana DeCohen come in and work with people. And this has been throughout the country, so that people down south, out west, that had questions, New York State was able to lead them into the right direction. And it was gold, and people were in tears. They were just so overjoyed and so happy that there was someone that could help them on their journey, and specifically in the veteran space. You know, so that becomes a very important thing, and that's where the unity really builds. And what I love about it is each one teach one, each one tell one.
Right.
So I've gotten contacts from people, and I'm like, well, how do you know me? Oh, well, so-and-so said you helped them, especially in the veteran space, and now I'm hoping you can help me. So I find community is just critical, to a caregiver journey, a patient's journey, and just sharing information because so many people just don't know, and there are so many resources out there.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And so just thinking about this, without telling my age, I remember when doctors used to make house calls, right? And that's not. I think there's some semblance of that trying to reemerge, but as we've gotten so large as a society, and then introducing social media, it seems that we become less connected, right? So I really appreciate what you have shared. Dr. Reichert, please weigh in.
I absolutely agree with everything that Denise just said. So there's so much going on in the fields of research related to dementia, relating to aging. Something that we have going on at NKI in the Geriatric Psychiatry Division is called the Memory Education and Research Initiative. And I'm probably jumping ahead on topics, but I think that this is very relevant to community because this program both helps individuals along the what we would call the diagnostic process, but also helps to provide that support and community. So
Mhm.
the E in Mary stands for education. This is actually how we became connected. And so what we like to do is to go out into the community, connect with all different sorts of organizations and individuals, educate on healthy brain aging, educate on what dementia is, what the different types of dementia are, and then connect with different resources in the community so that when individuals come into us, whether they have impairments or they're caregivers or they just are the worried well, someone who's concerned about their memory and aging, that we can refer them to the right resources that are out there. But there's always, room to expand that community, right? And to make more connections outside of, let's say, Rockland County, throughout New York State. And so I think that's just so critical and such for me, the most important part of what we've been doing in the Mary. Now, the other part is actually the research part, and that is where we are trying to kind of characterize within the community how we are aging in terms of behavior. What are the different variables that we can look at that can try to inform our ability to diagnose early so that we can hopefully one day treat and prevent the development of something like dementia or a type of dementia or related illnesses.
Right.
And again, connect with those really important resources out there for, preventing something happening down the line, let's say. Um, so I think that that's maybe didn't entirely answer your question, but certainly mirrored what Denise was saying.
Well, no, and I appreciate that. And I'm going to keep my eye on things because she seems to have exited
Yeah.
the room. And so I'm going to keep my eye on and readmit her when she rejoins us. And so, what is, if you could maybe share your take, right? So, it seems, not it seems, but we have become more medically advanced, certainly more technologically advanced. Things that people used to die from, we now live with. Um, has that kept pace in the mental health or the brain health space, in your view?
So I think there's definitely been some incredible advancements, I would say, just in the last 5 years. So if you watch the news, then you've probably heard that there are blood tests out there to potentially tell if somebody is kind of on that track for Alzheimer's disease. Now, these blood tests have actually been around for a long time, but they have become more sensitive, more refined, and they certainly help to guide, or they will be guiding clinical practice moving forward.
Mhm.
But interestingly enough, maybe I have an old-fashioned opinion on this, but the tried and true paper and pencil tests are something that we still rely very heavily on. So for our Mary program or for other research that we do, so we also have clinical trials going on related to dementia and Alzheimer's disease, just as other divisions at the Nathan Kline Institute. But what we use is these paper and pencil tests to essentially measure brain function. And so what it is that each of these tests represent a type of behavior or cognitive, what we call domain, like memory, like attention. And we know how an individual should be performing for their age and for their education level. And so when someone comes in, takes one of these tests, we see what their performance is, and then we compare them to others their age. And then, of course, in the framework of education. And so we can get a sense for whether somebody is average, performing above average, performing below average. And then based on their pattern of performance on a variety of tests, we know whether that could be representative of some decline, some significant impairment. And of course, that's just one piece of that puzzle, right? So that's where these other factors come into play. You know, being able to measure something in your blood or being able to use brain imaging like an MRI, you know, that helps to fill in the different pieces of the puzzle to understand what might be going on. And I think that kind of goes back to what was spoken about in the beginning is that, and I think Denise brought this up, that this process as we're aging can be very overwhelming and there's so much to think about and you don't know where to go and what resources to access. But something that we like to be able to provide is kind of what are those steps? And usually the first step is to come in and do that paper and pencil test and see where you stand for your age.
So that's interesting. So when just listening to you speak about the tests, my mind is immediately going to IQ tests, SATs, which, if the rest of the world is like me, traumatized me and
Me too.
definitely did not speak to um, my potential, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is there, do you think in the future going to be some sort of a pocket card, as it were, to provide to the veteran community and the aging community of things that they should ask for or things that the clinician should be doing as we move into our dotage?
You know, that's a great question. And a lot of these things already exist. And of course, as you asked earlier, technology is kind of advancing these so that, you know, you might be able to do this test at home or, you might be able to do it in the waiting room of a doctor's office. But basically, if somebody is experiencing impairment, let's say they go to their general practitioner or they're covered under Medicare, and I believe in New York State, your doctor should be asking you a certain set of questions, like a very brief screener. Have you experienced memory problems? Are you having concentration problems? There's different brief screeners that they should ask you about. And then they might refer you elsewhere to have one of these more involved screening measures.
Right.
And they give you kind of like a quick picture as to whether or not something's going on. So if you go to a neurologist, they will be able to do this.
Okay.
But these are just what we call brief screening tests. They give you a very coarse idea or rough idea if you are impaired or not. But the problem is there is a lot of variation in between impaired and not, right? And so that is where coming to another facility like ours, or even going to a neuropsychologist or a cognitive psychologist who can do more intensive testing, kind of like IQ testing. There's some overlap with some of the tests in an IQ test, are going to be more informative.
Interesting.
So
All right. So I heard from Denise. She is going to try to get her back in and have her rejoin the conversation. Uh, okay. Here we are. Boom. All right.
And Leslie, while Denise is joining, I do want to mention that there are a lot of companies out there that are working to develop, like I said, computer-based screening measures that you can do at home, you can do on your iPad. And what they do is kind of give you that same, rough idea. Do I have a significant problem or not? And obviously that's not the whole picture, but it
Right.
can be helpful. Especially, with the limitations of seeing a doctor and insurance and how much time a doctor might have to spend with you. So there's certainly a great resource to explore.
Okay. Appreciate that. So, Reverend Denise, I'm not sure how much of the conversation you were able to catch, but we were certainly talking about how we move these screenings into more mainstream, because unfortunately in Black and brown communities, a lot of this information doesn't filter through. So, is it because the gatekeepers are withholding the knowledge? Is it just because, um, the healthcare systems in Black and brown communities are not, up to snuff or speed with regard to this? So, Reverend Denise, can you, from your perch as a mental health care specialist, but also a faith based leader, speak to that?
Okay, definitely. I think that some of the issues are, especially in the Black and brown communities, there is a strange space when it comes to healthcare, and that's from previous traumas. So that even when information is available, it may not be utilized because of past experiences with the healthcare system. Also, I find that if we don't have access to certain spaces, we'll never know. What I try to do is actually get people to be more comfortable in those spaces. So for example, I may know that I have a chronic illness, but I don't trust healthcare workers.
Mm.
So I'm not going. And interestingly enough, for some of my mentors who are, doctors and things like that, medical doctors, nurses with PhDs, they said we have so many problems sometimes even reaching um, people of color because they won't necessarily come to us willingly. And even if we do go to them, they still may not come. So this is where the faith-based community really comes in, is really, really important. Because I always say to people, if you want active participants, go to a Wednesday afternoon service at a church. You will have a willing group of people to listen to you. If you go to the churches and say that these are the programs that we have, lots of times the health and wellness committees will say, yeah, definitely come on in, because they're always looking for programming. So I find that there's a big disconnect sometimes where people are looking for each other, but they can't seem to find the common space. So with the faith-based community, and some projects I'm actually even working on with some of my colleagues, is that we're trying to create a space where people feel comfortable, but we're also sharing information, which is very, very critical. But I think that sometimes the disconnect has been brutal. I'll just be honest, it's been brutal because we could have saved a lot of lives. People could have, not gone through illnesses that they're going through if they had the information. But because I think of fear and past traumas and things, they just won't do it. But I think the faith-based community, this is where we step up and give that space where people can get healing, sometimes from the physical, but also from the mental and spiritual as well.
Well, I certainly appreciate that. And, you know, once upon a time, the church or the faith based community was where charity stemmed from. So definitely important, I guess, to get back to those roots. So the next question that I want to pose to both of you, and I'm going to start with you again, Reverend Denise. So don't disappear.
No, I'm not going to disappear this time.
uh, why should veterans care about this, right? And just in terms also of spaces where you might be able to find them, um, American Legions and VFWs, as I understand it, are places that the veteran community frequents because there is a camaraderie that is familiar and comfortable, and they, I would imagine, seem to trust. So why should veterans care about this? What are some of the specific risk factors? And to your point, participating in this research, right? Some veterans do not trust the VA, and
Right.
to your point, some veterans just don't trust medical establishments, and it's not because of something they read back in the Tuskegee Airmen days. It's very 21st century. So,
Mhm. I think the veterans community is a very unique community. And actually, when I went to the event up in Albany 2 years ago, I heard the term Motrin and water, which I'd never heard before.
yeah.
And I said, Motrin and water, what are they talking about? So I guess I was the only one in the room that didn't know. But it's almost like a suck it up and get over it type of mentality.
Right.
So what happens is that when you tell people to suck it up and get over it, um, they now develop defense mechanisms where they're not going to trust you because you didn't care for me when I needed you the most.
Mm.
Um, and sometimes in military that's what happens. But for the veterans community, and I believe because they have served our country and many have served well, that we really do need to create a space for them where they are comfortable. Like you were saying, the American Legions and things like that, where they're in their space. And if we, as people who are civilians, can come to them with these services, but come into their space, not necessarily you come to us, but we come to you.
Hmm.
It changes, the atmosphere. When you care about me, you'll come to me. I don't necessarily do it in reverse, but you will come to me when I need your help. And
Right.
one thing I've learned in my studies, which I've been doing this for quite a few years now, is that we are victims of one and done. So we may see you every year, we may not. We may have a presentation every year, we may not. That does not build trust, number one, and it does not build community. It's not a one and done. So what I try to do is constantly have sessions, constantly reach out to people just to say hello, how are you? I haven't heard from you in a while. Is everything okay? That builds the trust. And I think with the veterans, trust is very important. But with people, trust is if I don't trust you, I'm not coming to you. If I don't believe what you say, I'm not coming to you. I'm not going to ask you for help. So these are the types of things that we have to do. Number one, trust building, and then community building. And I think in the veterans, like I said, in the veteran space, that's very, very important. I've met some wonderful, wonderful people. We've become friends. Why? Because we see each other all the time. We know how to reach out to each other. We know that, oh, okay, I don't know, but Denise knows. Or I don't know, but Leslie knows, or Chelsea knows, or this one, so I can get you connected. That makes all the difference in the world to people.
So, Dr. Chelsea, I'd like to get you to weigh in on this. Why should veterans care about any of this that we're talking about?
Well, I have an answer related to research and an answer that kind of separately builds off what Denise just said, which all of which is so important. And I think, I've learned so much over the last few years as I've kind of settled into this role I have at NKI, and that how important it is to build trust within different communities, right? And I think exactly what you're saying, Denise, is showing up, being there, and not just coming once. And, from a research perspective, a lot of times we're doing studies and we're trying to recruit for studies, right? But you can't just show up to a community that you're trying to build a relationship with and trust with and recruit. It's just, to me, it doesn't make sense. And I think a lot of times that can happen in research. And so that's, to me, not the way to move forward. And so I've been trying very hard through our community education, and I'm here to learn, to go into communities, to build the trust, to be there to educate, to provide resources, to form connections, and not to recruit. I'm here if you want resources related to research. I'm here if you want to support science. And I'm here if you want to learn more about this process. But to me, building trust is so important. And again, like you're saying, showing up not just once, multiple times, being that face that becomes familiar is so truly important. Related to research, though, I do think that research is important to veterans, right? Because there are so many, as you were saying, Leslie, risk factors that are specific to us as we age, but also specific to veterans that are going to increase the risk for many different diseases, but especially for things like dementia and especially for Alzheimer's disease. And so if you are not going to those care providers, if you are not seeing specialists, then you might not be aware of not only if you are experiencing impairment, but how different experiences or conditions are increasing that risk over time. Everybody on here, if you are aging, you are at increased risk for dementia. And that's true of all of us. That's not specific to veterans. But in terms of veterans, we know a lot of mental health issues that are more prevalent in those who have served are uniquely increasing that risk for dementia. So we have post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, substance use disorder, traumatic brain injury, all of these things that vary. I looked up the prevalences, anywhere from 2 to I'm seeing as much as 25% of veterans or people who have served have one of these conditions. just having those conditions could increase your risk of down the line as we are aging, develop dementia, develop Alzheimer's disease, or even another type of dementia. So if you are not aware of this, if you are not managing those conditions to the best of your ability, you might just almost be like a sitting duck. So with time, something could happen. And then you get to the point where I have impairment, I'm experiencing problems. Now what do I do? So our goal, especially through our Mary program, through a lot of research, is to figure out people who are at that increased risk, manage those conditions while they are ongoing, while they are chronic, while we can, and try to prevent the development of something like dementia or Alzheimer's disease. And that's a lot easier said than done, right? Sometimes that's going to be easier. If you have something like hypertension, well, that might be easier to manage than something like depression. But it's important to try, but that, of course, like you're saying, it goes back to, if you're not trusting of the medical community, if you're not trusting of the research community, if you're not willing to seek out those resources for very important reasons, then you're not addressing those risk factors. And so something could happen down the line.
Wow. So some very rich nuggets there, right? The ministry of presence is so very important because it creates transformational relationships, right? A lot of times, so we're not in COVID, but I remember being on some podcast during COVID and just really understanding the heartbeat of community when they were being asked to, take the COVID shot. And all year long, all decade long, we never hear from you. But now all of a sudden, it's urgent that you get this COVID shot. And they're like, nah, son, right? Because, you know, we we understand that COVID is horrible, it's dangerous. We have been impacted the most, in fact, in terms of the death rate. Uh, but communities feel that, oh, you only want us to do this because it's going to benefit you, right? And while it definitely will benefit us, that's not what you're leading with, right? So um
Just to jump in real quick, you brought in a very important point, the messaging. How is it being messaged to the hearer?
yeah,
Because sometimes what you hear or what you think people hear is not what they hear at all.
right,
And I think that, in the trust building, you have to build relationship and understand the community that you're reaching out to as well, because not all communities are the same.
right.
And one message to me may sound very different to someone else, where I won't be offended by it, they may be offended by it. So I think that we also have to be a lot more culturally sensitive, and not saying cultural as far as maybe race and things like that, but also different cultures. The faith-based community may have a different culture than the veterans community, right? Than the scientific community, than the medical community, than just nonprofit outreach community. All these communities hear differently. They've been trained differently. And I think sometimes we don't respect that they have been trained and educated differently. And the message becomes much clearer and much more receptive to the person when you're speaking my language. And I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm not trying to, say, oh, but I'm trying to speak to you so that you hear, as out here, but also in the heart, hear me as well. Because all of these
Yes.
things come together for sure.
And that's so important. And one of the things that we're doing at New York State Department of Veteran Services is really going into community to um, educate them on military cultural competence or military cultural humility, right? You can't know what it is if you haven't served. And even if you have served, um, one individual's experience is very different from another. And so, to just go in and with the assumption that, oh, this is good, so therefore they're going to see it as good and they're going to, embrace it, you're going to be met with some not positive responses. All right, so I'm enjoying this conversation and I'm hoping that our two guests are as well. And equally, I am hopeful that this is very informative and useful to all of our attendees who we thank very much for joining us today. Um, let's see, where can we move next? Real stories, I think. Real stories, example pathways, volunteer roles. Are there any real stories that either of you can share? Of course, not divulging the personal information of the storyteller that might be impactful for those who are attending to help at least get them thinking about, well, yeah, maybe this is something that I should consider. Um, so, anybody want to jump in with that? And even if they're not a veteran, certainly veteran stories because it's Veterans Month and we're addressing that. But even if they're not a veteran, the story has impact nonetheless. So, Dr. Chelsea, what do you have for us? Anything?
So I'm thinking it's not necessarily a specific person because it represents several individuals that we saw, and it's very much related to the pandemic. So we noticed during the pandemic, we were trying to remain in contact with individuals, right? Just check in, see how you're doing. We weren't able to continue our research because we were shut down like many places, sheltering at home and experiencing social isolation together, right? All these very unique experiences that we had. And so, what we found is as we started to return to our office, as our research started to resume, that individuals, very often older individuals, were coming to us having reporting that they were experiencing changes in most commonly in memory, more forgetfulness, difficulty concentrating, having significant concerns, right? And this could be new concerns, so people who maybe we've never even seen before who are coming to us for help, or people that we'd followed over the years. So in our Mary program, we invite people to come annually. We follow people for as many as 20 years, and we might have had someone who came 20 years ago and all of a sudden was returning kind of out of the blue. And so, what we were finding, and I think this is very important to veterans in particular, is that a lot of these individuals were experiencing significant depressive symptoms, but not necessarily at the level of, what you would need for a diagnosis, right? So, depression has a range of severity. And, when we think of depression, we often think of very significant sadness, loss of interest in usual activities. And it might be to such a degree that the individual might not be able to get out of bed, leave the house, engage in their usual everyday. Instead, we were finding that people were experiencing kind of like moderate levels of depressive symptoms, maybe even lower levels, what we would call a scientific term of subsyndromal. And so what we were finding is that not only was this experience very common, but it was masking almost as if it was, oh, I created a thumbs up. It was almost coming off as an impairment. And so it is not uncommon for someone to come in, do our testing, perform kind of lower than is expected for them for their age in certain areas, most commonly memory, but also in things like attention and concentration. And it turns out that that individual is not experiencing impairment, but instead is experiencing kind of like low levels of depressive symptoms that are relatively chronic. And
Mm.
this is important because this is kind of a developing area of research. We know depression is a risk factor for dementia and for Alzheimer's disease. That is established in the literature. It's something that our lab actually studies. We know people that have severe depression have, increased evidence of kind of brain changes that might be associated with Alzheimer's disease. But what the literature is showing now is that people that have this low levels of depression also are showing signs of brain changes related to Alzheimer's disease. And that's pretty significant because I think when you go, this is my own experience, but I think when you go to your general practitioner, or even if you see a psychiatrist, those lower levels of depressive symptoms might not be something that you manage. It might not be something that you are as concerned with and you kind of just, deal with it in your everyday to the best of your ability because you are functioning, whether it's socially, in your job, in your home life. But these are things that I think, at least from our experience, are one concerning because you do see this behavioral change related to things like memory and attention. But also, it is something that is important to address because it could still be something that increases your risk of dementia or Alzheimer's disease down the road.
Hmm.
So,
Interesting. That's very interesting. Reverend Denise, any
Um,
stories?
sure. One thing that seems to be coming up quite a bit for me is the male caregiver space and men that are caring for spouses, parents, um, sometimes children, but mostly spouses and parents. And some of the issues that are coming up is that, we want to have access to men and male support groups. And it's so interesting that in some of the other work I'm doing in the cancer space, where some of the presentations that were given through our tap and share, where we have the caregivers come in and actually share their stories, that people, and in particular some of the veterans that actually have presented, were the most memorable. Because it seemed like they, were caring for a loved one and also dealing with their own either, physical ailments or even sometimes mental health ailments. So now you have a series of things that have compounded on top of themselves. And some of their stories, people are still talking about it over a year later.
Mm.
And, so what I've really been trying to do in a couple of our sessions, we had male caregivers come in and speak about the male caregiver space because it is growing. And we have a lot of our men that are just saying we have to care for our spouses. And we want to be the ones that do it. We don't necessarily want anybody else to do it. And that comes with its own set of challenges and things as well. So the male caregiver space has been huge for us. Also, the hospice and palliative care space is becoming huge for us as well, because people just don't understand sometimes what palliative care is, right? They don't, when you think of hospice, you think of automatic death, and that's not necessarily the case.
Right.
So there's a lot of misinformation, but also the miseducation brings about fear. And I think when you start operating, especially as a caregiver, because I've been there, when you start operating about within fear, things become even worse and even more overwhelming. Talking back to what Chelsea was talking about,
Right.
just that mental health space just becomes just so overwhelming. And you see that sometimes caregivers will pass away before the people that they're caring for because they are so stressed out. They are so overwhelmed. They don't feel that they have anyone that they can talk to. And it's so interesting that, in a lot of our sessions, we're so vulnerable. We talk, we cry, we laugh, we don't care. But we put it out there so that it is the healthy space where people are willing to share their story. But I think that those areas, we have a couple of areas that we just are not tapping into and touching on as much as we should. And that's where the stories really come in. Because when I hear that your story, oh, I've been through that, I'm a lot more comfortable to share with you. And I feel that I'm not in it by myself. And it does kind of take the out of caregiving and being a patient and understanding that there's somebody else out there that has your situation and can talk to you.
Yeah, for sure. So I see a question in the chat, and I'm, judiciously eyeballing the time. So there's a question from Tony Barnett. And Tony, we thank you for your question, which says, "Hello, I'm a female veteran. Can you shed any light on the difference between ADHA slash PTSD slash menopause?" And she asks because from what she has seen, the symptoms overlap a great deal. And how do you determine what the actual cause is? Now, I'm certainly not a doctor. Well, I am a doctor, but not that kind of a doctor. And I don't play one on TV. But just from what I understand in my non doctor mental health scientific um, understanding, is that psychiatric conditions can co-occur. And if you have one, it can lead to another. So it might be very difficult to, pinpoint where one ends and the other one begins. So, uh, Chelsea, I'm going to direct that to you.
Thank you. I'm also going to say that I'm not necessarily, I'm not an expert in a lot of those topics overlapping. I'm also a PhD, not an MD, but my educated response or my educated guess is going to be very much what you're saying. There is going to be a co-occurrence of different disorders, which can, either increase the chance that you have another one or be related to another one. But so menopause is going to be, the major hormonal shift that women experience, right? Usually in their later 40s to 50s. There is an equivalent, it's not equivalent, I don't think, but there is a version that men experience called andropause, where there is a change, this big hormonal shift, kind of in the same time period, related to testosterone. In women, it's related to estrogen. And what I've been reading about actually recently is that in kind of the pre-period for this, so for women, it's called perimenopause, women seem to notice some sort of cognitive changes that are actually associated with these hormonal shifts. So there might be reports of brain fog, changes or difficulty in concentration, increased forgetfulness. And of course, this is all coupled with everything that's going on in your life, managing, whatever you have, which could be a household, children, caregiving responsibilities of elderly parents, work, all these different factors. And now on top of that, you're starting to experience almost like a sense of overwhelm. And people are reporting things like brain fog, concentration issues, forgetfulness. And I mention this because we have now seen kind of an increase in younger individuals coming to us because they are noticing these changes and they're kind of acutely aware of these changes and they're wondering, am I becoming demented? Am I becoming impaired? Now, those symptoms, of course, might overlap with things like ADHD, dementia, PTSD as well. And I think my educated response is going to be that the cause is different for these different conditions. While they may all be chronic, they might have started differently. So PTSD is typically going to be in response to some sort of traumatic experience or event. It can continue throughout the lifetime, right? It can be acute, but it can be chronic. Menopause is going to be kind of timed in that period where you see those hormonal shifts. But is also very important because those hormones that we have, estrogen and testosterone, they're also very important protective hormones actually for our brain health. And so as those levels start to drop and we kind of adjust, we might see those changes as a result of that shift. And ADHD, again, might have a different cause, so something else going on related to it with those overlapping symptoms. So how do you rule these things out? Or how do you determine what the cause is? And I think it's probably very much like how we diagnose dementia or Alzheimer's disease. A lot of it is ruling out other things going on, other causes, or kind of understanding kind of the etiology behind when each of these things happen or when they happen in relation to something. I don't know if I actually answered the question, but that would be my guess. And I think that these are all really important things, and important to point out that menopause and PTSD can both kind of increase that risk of dementia and are very important to kind of be aware of and obviously differently deal with, whereas ADHD, as far as I know, is not necessarily a risk factor for anything like that, but can certainly be something that's burdensome, in your life, depending on your work or whatnot.
Thank you for that. And so what I'm hearing in all of this is we have to, as individuals, be our first and best advocate, right? And it's hard to do that if you don't know what you don't know. But if you notice something is off, and this is to my sisters and brothers in arms, because we have been socialized as veterans or while we were active duty, mission first, mission always, embrace the suck, take the Advil and water, and just keep soldiering on. Um, that, had a purpose, but it served a purpose, not our well-being, I might add. But we need to work to desocialize, if that is even a word, um, from that way of being into prioritizing our own uh, mental and physical well-being. It's not a sign of weakness. It's actually very much a sign of being human, right? And so I think when we notice that if something is off, we need to not ignore it. We need to not try to soldier on and power through. And I'm still working on that today. Um, not downplaying the uh, injuries and all like that. And so um, that's mission number one for veterans, because that is, I think, the biggest barrier to us seeking help, to us speaking out, and articulating that something is the matter, whether it is physical, whether it is regarding mental health. And I see one question, another question. So we've got about another 7 minutes. So the question is from Professor Olga Lucia Torres. She says her father, a veteran, was reticent, and it speaks to what I just talked about, to accept his obvious memory loss. How do we help vets understand that early treatment of Alzheimer's or dementia is beneficial to long term outcome? As caregivers or patient advocates, we have a duty. And so while you two are tackling that, I'm going to ask our participants to, you know, create a chatterfall with regard to how you have received today's chat and chew. What is one word that you would describe, and pop it in the chat to say how you're walking away from today's chat and chew. All right, and to our panelists, have at it.
That's a tough question.
It's a tough question.
That's a tough question, because when you know that something's going on, and I think that's for all of us. Sometimes we don't want to acknowledge it. We really don't, because we understand what's getting ready to happen. And I think it goes back to the fear factors. As long as you don't talk about it, it doesn't exist. And all the while you're getting worse, but you just don't want to talk about it. And I think that, again, that's where community is an important part, because sometimes parents won't hear things from children, but they'll hear it from another parent. Sometimes children don't want to hear from parents, right? But if they go to another child, they will listen to another child. So I think that, trying to get him, maybe you, Olga, trying to get your dad to listen or to understand it may not be always the best route, because you're the child. But if you can get him into a community, of people, who can talk to him, and he would be a lot more freer in conversation, that might help. Because I'm telling you, that goes across all cultures. People think it's only one culture. Some are a little more intense than others. But it's almost like, you talk to someone about a will. What are you trying to do? Kill me? That's an age issue, right? Because what are you trying to do? Kill me? You think I'm going to die? So again, sometimes the speaker has to be different. You can understand and see what's going on, but that's where you need community to come in and kind of help you, kind of get through the situation. Because sometimes, parents are not going to listen to their children. They're just not going to do it. Just like children don't think that parents don't know anything, so they don't listen to them either. But again, if it's another person, you're like, I just said the same exact thing. Yes, you did, but it's coming from a different person, so they hear it differently. So try to get a community around him, and yourself as well, that you can really speak to, and not that you scare him into it, but that he feels comfortable now talking about it.
Amazing. Dr. Chelsea, you want to add to that?
I would like to do every education event with Denise, because I like following up your answers. Denise, your answers are they're so beautiful.
Thank you.
It's so true, because it made me think of telling my mom about various risk factors she has, right? And she won't listen to me. She doesn't want to hear it from me, no matter what I say. And that's so true. So I think related to that, and I know a lot of members of the Alzheimer's Association are on the call, I think maybe trying a support group, and not that that is an easy, mountain to cross, right? Sometimes even just going there is going to be too much, but maybe trying to join a support group of other individuals who are also experiencing kind of early impairment, and kind of having that experience to talk to others to kind of see what changes they're noticing, and maybe connecting with other people like that and hearing about their experiences might open his mind up to getting some treatment. But I do think related to that, it's very important to be willing, right? To force an individual to do something is going to be tough for everyone involved. Denise had the perfect answer. I think kind of, if talking to you as the daughter doesn't work, maybe a different care provider too might be better able to communicate. So sometimes our care team themselves are so essential, right? If it's someone we can connect with, maybe someone that looks like us, is representative of us, we might be able to really kind of connect with at different levels, and that might be a good way to connect with your father and kind of get that message across.
Another quick point I want to put into, and I'm going to put my information in the chat, Dr. Leslie, if you don't mind.
Oh, absolutely.
Contact information. I actually am chair of the advisory board for an app called Aliviato, which I'm in partnership with NYU, which is a caregiver app, which, when people with dementia, specifically towards dementia, are going through anything, with dementia, as far as they may have a bad night, right? A bad day, that you can actually start to track this information. And I think too, if you keep a journal, to Olga's question, sometimes journaling, so that when you talk to people, you can remember specific things that have happened, can also help you along in your journey as well. So I'm going to put that contact information in there as well. I know for Aliviato, we're looking for a couple of more folks to join in this research study. And it's an app that goes on your phone, and you just kind of track and journal what you're going through. And I find that people who really journal it and write it down, because if I don't put it in my calendar, it does not happen.
Right.
It doesn't happen. I'm telling you, I'm at that age, it doesn't happen. But if I write it down, I can now speak to it again and say, this is how I felt, or this is what I was going through, or this is what they were going through. And then somebody can say, oh yeah, but maybe if you try this, and this, or maybe let me talk to them and things, that it might be a little bit easier for you.
So Dr. Chelsea, I want you to put your info in the chat as well. And so I'm going to quickly rattle off some of the chatterful words that were posted. Appreciated, community, well-informed, inspired, enlightened, kindness, educational. Somebody said selective hearing is real. The struggle is real. It's payback for when all of them times as a kid you didn't listen. What else? So those are just some of the how it resonated with those who were in community with us today. So thank you to our esteemed guests, colleagues, friends, Reverend Denise and Dr. Chelsea. Please remember to put your information in the chat. We will work with our comms team at NYS Department of Veteran Services to put this recording on our socials, so you'll be able to go there to view it. And I just want to say it has been the honor of my afternoon to be in community with each and every one of you. I'm Dr. Lessie Branch, everybody's favorite moderator. Till next time.
Thank you for having us. This is wonderful.
Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon, everybody.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.